There is an extinct human ancestor that came closer to ending our species than any asteroid, any volcano, any predator that ever walked the Earth. It did it by almost dying. We don't have a name for these people. We barely have their bones. What we have is the damage they left behind, written into the DNA of every single person alive right now, including yours. In 2023, a team of geneticists ran a new kind of math across the genomes of 354 living people and found a scar in the numbers. Around 930,000 years ago, the breeding population of our direct ancestors collapsed to roughly 1,280 individuals. It stayed that low for about 117,000 years. Before we finish, I want to show you a jawbone pulled out of a limestone quarry outside Casablanca, Morocco, because that jaw belongs to whatever walked out the other side. Most of us learned human evolution as a line. An ape stands up, gets taller, loses the hair, picks up a spear, and turns into a guy on a poster. Clean, directional, inevitable. The real record looks nothing like that. Over the past 4 million years, at least 22 different kinds of hominin have existed. 21 of them are gone. We're the last one standing in a family that used to be crowded, and for most of that history our particular branch was not the favourite. Rewind to about 1 million years ago. Homo erectus, pronounced Homo erectus, is the dominant human on the planet. Upright, tool-using, comfortable with fire, and successful in a way we tend to underrate. Erectus lasted well over 1 million years. Our species has managed about 300,000. Score human species by longevity in Erectus beats us 5 times over, and it isn't close. And Erectus, or something very close to it, had already gone continental. In 2022, at a site in northern Spain called Cima del Elefante, pronounced Cima del Elefante, in the Atapuerca Hills, a crew dug fragments of a face out of a layer of silt more than 50 feet down. 2 years of reconstruction later, the team led by Rosa Huguet had most of a mid-face. They nicknamed it Pink. It dates between 1.4 and 1.1 million years old, and it is the oldest human face ever recovered in Western Europe. The nose is flat and primitive, closer to Erectus than to anything modern. Long before the crash, our relatives were already scattered from southern Africa to Spain to Eastern Asia. In Africa, though, the Erectus populations were thinning. Out of that thinning came something new, the population that would eventually produce us, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, pronounced Denisovans. Nobody has a formal name for them that everyone agrees on. That group is the ancestor in this story, and it nearly ended in the dirt. Genomes carry history. Every time a population shrinks, it throws variants away. The rare ones go first because a rare variant lives inside a small number of bodies, and when those bodies don't have children, that variant is gone permanently. When the population recovers, it rebuilds from whatever happened to survive. The genetic fingerprint of a crash isn't a hole, it's a pattern in what's missing, and it lasts for hundreds of thousands of years. Reading that pattern this far back is the hard part. Most methods go blurry somewhere around a few 100,000 years, the way an old photo falls apart when you zoom too far in. So a team led by Haipeng Li at the Shanghai Institute of Nutrition and Health, working with Yixuan Pan at East China Normal University, and the Italian paleoanthropologist Giorgio Manzi, built a different tool. They called it FitCol. Rather than tracking long chunks of chromosome, it works from the frequency spectrum, the census of how common each individual variant is across thousands of people, and it calculates the expected pattern with far more precision than anything before it. They pointed it at 354 genomes drawn from 50 populations around the world. The curve came back with a canyon in it. Before the crash, the model puts our ancestral breeding population somewhere around 98,000. During it, about 280, a loss of roughly 98.7%. One caution matters enormously here, that 280 is an effective population size, not a head count. Effective population size counts only the individuals actually passing genes forward, and it usually runs well below the number of warm bodies walking around. The real census population may have been several thousand, scattered in pockets that mostly never met. Even at the generous end, take the number seriously for a second. The bleachers at a decent Texas high school football game hold more people than that. One section of an NFL stadium holds more people than that. Everyone you have ever met, everyone in your phone, every human being on this planet, all 8 billion of us. came out of a group you could seat inside a single suburban gymnasium with room left over. And they were not sitting in a gymnasium. They were spread thin across Africa, in small bands walking. That group wasn't only carrying us either. The three lineages hadn't separated yet, which means those same bodies were carrying the Neanderthals and the Denisovans at the same time. Had those bands gone under during one bad stretch of centuries, there would be no Neanderthals in the caves of France, no Denisovans on the Tibetan plateau, no Homo sapiens anywhere, ever. Homo erectus in Asia would have been the last humans on Earth, and erectus eventually died out too. The planet goes back to being a world with apes on it and nothing else. The duration is the part that gets me. 117,000 years. At roughly 24 years to a generation, that's about 5,000 generations of living at the edge. All of recorded human history from the first clay tablet in Mesopotamia to the phone in your pocket runs about 5,000 years. The bottleneck lasted more than 20 times longer than everything we have ever written down. Stand inside it. You're somewhere in Eastern or Southern Africa. The band you belong to is maybe 30 people. In your entire life, you will meet perhaps 100 humans, and you will eventually share a fire with almost all of them. Your world is drying out. The waterhole your grandmother described is a cracked flat of mud with a rim of animal bone around the edge. You walk farther than she did, and you eat less. The grass is taller than it used to be, and there is less shade in it. Midday is the kind of heat where shade stops being a comfort and becomes a resource you plan the entire day around, and there is no shelter you didn't build yourself out of thorn branches. You carry a hand axe. It's a teardrop of stone, worked on both faces, sharp enough to open a hide and heavy enough to break a joint. That design was already ancient when you were born, and it will still be in use hundreds of thousands of years after you die. It is the single most successful piece of technology in human history, and it is the only thing standing between your body and everything with teeth. The predators are not the ones from the documentaries. Short-faced hyenas that outweigh a grown man, with jaws built to crack a femur the way you'd snap a pretzel rod. Big cats with no learned fear of you whatsoever. Crocodiles in whatever water is left, and the water that's left is where everything goes. There's nobody to fall back on. No next valley with a bigger group in it. No surplus anywhere on Earth. If your band goes under, nothing replaces it. That's what a bottleneck actually is. Not one bad year. 5,000 generations of no margin. Whatever pushed them that far down wasn't a predator, and it wasn't a rival species. It was weather. Between about 1.225 million and 700,000 years ago, the planet changed its rhythm. Before that, ice ages came and went on a roughly 41,000-year cycle, driven by the tilt of Earth's axis. Regular, mild by later standards. Then the pacing stretched toward 100,000 years, and the cold periods got longer, deeper, and far more punishing. Geologists call it the mid-Pleistocene transition. Pleistocene is pronounced Pleistocene, and they still argue about what set it off. The first hard step of that shift landed directly on top of our ancestors, around 900,000 years ago, in a glacial stretch labelled marine isotope stage 22. Ice sheets grew, sea level dropped. In Africa, which had no ice sheets, the whole thing arrived as drought. Savanna and desert spread. Forest broke into islands. Rain came less often and stopped arriving when it was supposed to. An ape that depends on unpredictable water in an unpredictable country has two options: move or die where it stands. Some of them moved. There's a serious argument published in 2024 by Giovanni Muttoni and Dennis Kent that the same falling sea level that dried Africa also opened land routes into Eurasia, and that the crash and the great dispersals out of Africa are two faces of the same climate event. Then, around 813,000 years ago, the numbers move. The population climbs, and by the standards of everything preceding it, the climb is fast. Nobody knows exactly why. The obvious candidate is climate loosening its grip as that glacial stage ended. The researchers who found the crash floated a second possibility, that this is roughly when our ancestors gained real control of fire. Cooked food pulls more calories out of the same carcass. Fire stretches the useful day past sundown, and it turns a camp into a place predators avoid rather than a buffet. They labelled that as speculation, and it is. What the genetics shows is the shape of the recovery, not the reason for it. The bill came due in our DNA, and we are still paying it. The model estimates that roughly 2/3 of the genetic diversity our lineage carried was deleted inside that window and never came back. That has a consequence you can measure today. For a large mammal spread across an entire planet, humans are strangely uniform. Chimpanzee populations in Central Africa carry about twice the genetic variation our whole species does. Rhesus macaques carry roughly 3 times as much. Researchers have pointed out for years that 2 chimps living in the same stretch of forest can differ from each other more than 2 people from opposite ends of the earth. We look wildly different to each other because our brains are built to notice faces and skin and hair. Underneath, we're a species assembled from a very small number of survivors, and it shows in the code. The demographer's numbers say the same thing from another angle. The long-term effective population size of our entire species runs under 10,000. For the rhesus macaque, a monkey confined to one part of Asia, it's closer to 80,000. There is more genetic room to maneuver inside that monkey than inside a species that covers every continent on the planet. Low diversity isn't a neutral fact either. It means fewer variants for selection to work with, more inbreeding, and a thinner buffer against any new disease that comes through. It made our ancestors more fragile at the exact moment they could least afford to be. Something else happened inside that window, and it's the strangest thing in this video. Every other great ape has 48 chromosomes. Chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans. 48. You have 46. 2 ancestral chromosomes fused end to end into what we now call chromosome 2. This isn't guesswork. You can read the seam. Chromosome 2 carries the leftover DNA of 2 ancient chromosome tips stuck together in the middle, plus the remains of a second, dead anchor point sitting exactly where it shouldn't be. It's a weld, and the weld is visible. A fusion like that begins in one individual. In a large population, it usually goes nowhere, a rounding error against millions of normal chromosomes. In a population of 1,000 or so breeders, that same change can sweep through the entire species in a geological blink. Several researchers have argued the fusion site's close to this bottleneck in time, and that the crash is what let it take over. That is a hypothesis, not a settled result, and the dating carries real uncertainty. The logic is clean though. Then there's the brain. African Homo erectus skulls from before the crash hold, brains somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 the size of the one in your head. The skulls that come after, the ones assigned to our last common ancestor with the Neanderthals, Jump, Bodo, Saldanha, Broken Hill. Several land close to modern size, and one of them runs larger than the modern average. The same team that found the bottleneck ran the numbers on brain volume before and after, and the increase is statistically significant. Causation is a much heavier claim than correlation, and nobody should pretend otherwise. A population that's small could be reshaped fast by selection, or by pure chance, and chance shoves small populations around violently. Either way, the human brain got dramatically bigger on the far side of the worst stretch our lineage ever lived through. Now the bones, or rather, the absence of them. There's a documented thinning in the African and Eurasian hominin fossil record across roughly this window, and it was noticed long before genetics ever pointed here. Giorgio Manzi, the Roman paleoanthropologist on the original team, put the connection bluntly. Fewer people, fewer bones. The empty stretch in the rock and the crash in the genome are the same events seen through 2 different instruments. Fossils don't form easily. It takes a body in the right sediment at the right moment, and the odds are terrible even when a species is abundant. Shrink that species by 98% and the odds go to almost nothing. A tiny population is close to invisible to paleontology by definition. Almost nobody was there to be buried. Which brings me back to the jaw. In January of 2026, a team led by Jean-Jacques Hublin published a set of hominin fossils from a cave inside the Thomas Quarry, a limestone works on the edge of Casablanca, Morocco. Mandibles, teeth, a few other pieces, nothing that looks like much in a museum case. The date is what makes them extraordinary. 773,000 years old, give or take about 4,000. The team pinned it by sampling the sediment 180 separate times and catching the precise moment Earth's magnetic field flipped polarity, the Matuyama-Brunner's reversal, pronounced Matuyama Brunes, one of the sharpest time markers that exist anywhere on this planet. The fossils were sitting inside the flip. 773,000 years ago is roughly 40,000 years after the bottleneck lifts. The teeth, scanned down to the junction between enamel and dentine, match neither Homo erectus nor Homo antecessor, pronounced Ancestor, from Spain. They look like something sitting near the root of us. Hublin's read is that these may be the best candidates we currently have for the African population at the base of the shared ancestry of modern humans, Neanderthals and Denisovans. That's a face on the far side of the wall. Not the survivors themselves, their descendants, thousands of generations down the line, walking out into an emptier world with a bigger brain and 2 fewer chromosomes than their cousins. I've been telling you all of this like it's settled. It isn't. In late 2024 and through 2025, 2 independent teams took the bottleneck apart. Yun Deng, Rasmus Nielsen, and Yun Song, writing in the journal Genetics, argued the signal is a statistical artifact. Their case is that Fitcol can manufacture a sharp crash out of data, generated by a gentle, ordinary decline, and that the original paper never reported the uncertainty that would have shown how many other histories fit the same data equally well. A second group, Trevor Cousins and Aaron Dervasula, published in Molecular Biology and Evolution under the flat title Insufficient Evidence. Cousins and Dervasula also floated an alternative that's arguably stranger than the crash. Instead of one population nearly dying, picture 2 ancestral populations splitting apart around 1.5 million years ago, staying separate for well over 1 million years, then merging back together roughly 300,000 years ago. Deep structure like that leaves a signature in living DNA that can look a great deal like a bottleneck, without anyone ever coming close to extinction. The original team answered this July, back in Molecular Biology and Evolution. They benchmarked their method against 10 billion simulated genealogies, reported that it recovers the crash in cases where the rival method misses it entirely, and pointed at the fossil gap, the brain size jump, and the climate record as independent support. That's where it stands in the summer of 2026. One camp says our species nearly blinked out of existence. The other says we're chasing a ghost in the math. Both camps are serious people. Neither has folded. Mark deserves the honest version, so there it is. An open question, with the real scientists on both sides and an enormous amount riding on the answer. Whichever way it eventually lands, the shape of the thing holds. We did not arrive here on momentum. There was no schedule that guaranteed a species with language and agriculture and telescopes. For an immense stretch of time, our ancestors were a marginal ape on a drying continent, running low on options, and the entire future of the human race was carried around inside a few hundred bodies that had no idea they were carrying anything at all. They weren't heroes. They didn't overcome. They were hungry. They were afraid of the dark for excellent reasons, and they caught a run of luck that lasted 5,000 generations. Every city, every language, every song, every person you love sits on top of that run of luck. We aren't the inevitable